And we're back with our look at 50 horror classics. Now we get into the realm of exploitation and tragic antiheroes. First, we get a look at The Maniac. No, not that 80s exploitation flick about the guy who scalps women. Or the remake starring Elijah Wood. That's a weird choice for the villain. But far older. This one is about a crazy scientist who develops a serum that can resurrect the dead. I'm thinking this plus H.P. Lovecraft was kind of ripped off in the Reanimator movies. Unfortunately, his manic episodes draw the ire of his assistant, a failed vaudeville impersonator who, despite being really good, has, I guess, gotten on the wrong side of the law. That's why he's working for the guy. And after they steal a woman's body from the local morgue, which inexplicably looks like a dungeon, and manage to bring her back to a degree, the guy then insists that the impersonator shoot himself in the heart so the doctor can test this other heart that's been kept beating thanks to his serums. But after giving the guy the gun, he just shoots the doctor. At which point, he dons some makeup, changes his voice, changes his clothes, and assumes the doctor's identity, walling him up in a section of the basement where a cat happens to also be hidden. It decides to stay with the body for some reason, possibly using it to keep itself alive. Unfortunately, the impersonator's stress levels go through the roof, and when he gets asked to be an actual doctor and tries to give a placebo to this guy suffering from high stress, he accidentally gives the guy adrenaline, which turns him into a regular Jekyll and Hyde, at which point he makes off with the living but somewhat catatonic formerly dead woman, and let's just say not nice things happen. Meanwhile, the guy's wife, who realized what happened and realized that that guy is not the doc, decides to blackmail him. Once the crazy guy comes back, if the not doc can turn the guy into an obedient zombie for the guy's wife, she'll keep his secrets. For now. Meanwhile, the not doc's estranged wife, who's a showgirl, in a room full of scantily clad women, talks about how apparently the guy's now loaded. He's got an inheritance from a relative in Australia, and she's decided to get her cut. Unfortunately, this doesn't factor into the not doc's plans, so after they get to talking, he tricks her into sedating the crazy guy's wife to get both of them out of the way, and pulls the same trick on the crazy guy's wife. So now they both end up having a tussle in the basement right next to the walled-up body. Luckily, this cat breeder, who should rot for his practices because he thinks breeding cats for their fur is a good idea. Jerk. Luckily, he does one good thing, calls the police, who find the house in disarray, and the semi-catatonic woman, who, let's just say, bared a lot in her performance so far, is nowhere to be seen. And the crazy guy just disappears from the film altogether. So it's just the not doc and the two women fighting each other. Ultimately, the police break it up, and thanks to the cat from earlier, the police locate the dead body, and they haul the now crazy not doc away to jail, where he rants and raves. Interspersed with the film, actually, are excerpts from medical journals, I guess, that talk about various mental illnesses and how they manifest. This film was really messed up, but in a good way. It was voted as terrible, but in a good way. And it was also labeled an exploitation flick. And I can see why. In the 30s, this was really, really messed up. It's tame by today's standards, but it must have had audiences back then up in arms. Our next adventure is the epic Metropolis by Fritz Lang, a well-known German filmmaker who puts a lot of himself into his characters, including that of his checkered past. He's a war veteran. He may or may not have had something to do with the suicide of his wife. And he was the quintessential extreme filmmaker. He was the James Cameron of his day. And the visual effects for his film, people can't actually say that they were the greatest thing since sliced bread, because at the time, sliced bread wasn't invented until the following year after the film came out. It's that old. For a while, it was cut down because it was too cerebral. So, some would argue that it was left inferior until decades later, when a mostly intact copy was found and it was restored. And it's the restored version that I decided to check out. It's pretty intense, actually. This dystopian future has the rich and powerful working in clean business offices, toiling in their own way. The young live in opulent ignorance, playing sports and generally just goofing off, while being taught what they need to do in the future. Meanwhile, the working class kill themselves every day to try and keep the machinery that keeps the metropolis running. And unfortunately, things are coming to a head, because one day, some poor schmuck is completely burned out and unable to keep his part of the machinery running, and so There's an overload, an explosion, and a lot of people are injured. Now, this is witnessed by Frater, son of the main executive at Tower of Babel Industries. That's a huge portent. And he found his way down into the lower machinery area thanks to a visit from Maria, one of the working class women who was teaching some children about how the world works. And she managed to get them up to the social club where Frater spends his days for a visit, before being quickly shooed away by the proprietor of the social club. Anyway, Frater followed her down to the machinery room and witnessed the accident, and tells his father about it, who is upset that his son had to tell him about the accident and not his employees, which should have been kept in the loop. Yeah, he's more upset that he didn't get informed properly rather than the loss of human life. Yeah, nice priorities, guy. He fires one of his underlings as punishment, who then proceeds to try and off himself, but Frater stops him. And he hatches a plan. He meets up with a worker he befriended earlier and switches places with him, while he sends the worker, disguised as himself, to the surface to work with the former employee to try and get information to maybe change things, because things need to change. Unfortunately, he gets distracted by another type of social club, which is very NSFW, and he drops off the radar for a while. Meanwhile, Frater's dad gets evidence that there have been private meetings among the workers, which turn out to be a sort of church service held by Maria about how the Tower of Babel, the original one, was destroyed because people just couldn't understand one another. And she uses the analogy of the head and hands need some kind of bridge, and that would be the heart. And that's what Metropolis has been lacking. A heart to coordinate the head and hands. So, Frater's dad decides to use Maria for nefarious purposes, because he wants things to stay just as they are, with the hands working, the heads thinking, and no heart anywhere to be found. So he goes to one of his old associates, who I'm going to call Lefty, because his right hand was damaged, creating a statue of his one true love, who just so happened to be Mr. Frater's wife, and who also died. So they talk, and then, out of the blue, Lefty introduces Frater's dad to a robot that he's been building to either turn into a likeness of his former beloved, or take some of the burden off of the workers. Either way, the robot's not going to be used for its intended purposes. Frater's dad insists that Lefty give the robot the likeness of Maria, who will then be used as a pawn in keeping the workers where they are. So eventually, Maria gets lured to Lefty's house, which has been rigged up with special door locks. So she's trapped, and the robot is given her likeness, and the actress plays both characters beautifully. Maria's innocence and the robot's insanity, even altering her eyes to look similar to that of her creator. So, the fake Maria forms a plan with Frater's dad, and eventually Frater leaves the underground and comes back to the surface to look for the guy who he was supposed to be working with, but who never showed up. Yeah, he shows up eventually. Only to find his dad and the false Maria hobnobbing, and he freaks out. And he's out long enough for some time to pass. He hallucinates that she's become a burlesque dancer and who's basically tempting the semi-virtuous surface dwellers. And it's a really trippy scene. And while that didn't quite happen that way, it is revealed that the fake Maria has been enticing guys to fight duels for her and off themselves for her and eschew the family-friendly social club for the NSFW social club. And then she disappears from the surface to head down to incite a riot among the workers, to tear down the machinery that they've been killing themselves to keep going, and to take a fight to the surface, to basically cut their nose off to spite their face. And eventually, it's revealed that while they did manage to smash the machinery, despite the innocent foreman's best efforts, the whole underground starts to flood. And the surface dwellers and the workers eventually confront one another with fake Maria in the center. And the foreman, having barely escaped the underground with his life, reminds the workers that they left their kids in the underground. So presumably they're all dead. When in reality, the real Maria, who's just barely managed to escape Lefty's house, manages to locate Frater, who's made it to the underground, and despite the elevators to the surface being destroyed, they manage to climb out an air shaft and reach the surface. And by now, the two mobs have combined in their hatred of fake Maria. The workers hate Maria because she tricked them into basically killing their kids, and the surface dwellers hate her because she basically started turning the semi-virtuous surface dwellers wild. So they decide to burn her at the stake, which she doesn't mind because she's a robot. Now, at first, when he and Maria become separated, he thinks that they're burning the real Maria when really it's the robot. Meanwhile, real Maria has made it into a cathedral chased by Lefty, who is now hallucinating that she is his lost lady love. So Frater has to go in and be a hero. He fights the guy, Lefty tumbles off the roof, and with the day essentially saved, though the city needs some rebuilding, the workers fall back in line, and it's up to Frater to get the head and hands coordinated by getting his dad and the foreman to properly shake hands and start talking things out. And there are casualties. The guy who took Frater's place for a while on the surface, he actually takes a knife for the guy when the mob sees that Frater is a surface dweller and wants to kill him. And of course Lefty died. But those are mainly the only two casualties, aside from the people who were killed in the explosion at the beginning of the flick. But hopefully Metropolis will come back stronger and better than it was before, thanks to the head and hands finally having a heart. And yes, he gets the girl. Next is a pseudo-vampire flick titled The Vampire Bat. It takes place in a German village. I assume the time period is the at present, which was 1933. The villagers aren't completely primitive, but it's not exactly a modern-day metropolis. They still have night watchmen that aren't actually police officers. One such watchman sees something moving along the roof of one of the buildings, and there are an inordinate number of bats hanging around. And then bodies start piling up, with puncture marks in their necks, drained of blood. Now the villagers immediately think vampire, because normally, yeah, that would be the case. Unfortunately, their suspicions are directed at the wrong person. The guy who played Renfield in the Dracula movie, he comes back as a town simpleton named Herman, who steals food to survive and has this weird fascination with bats. Now, the villagers hypothesize, along with some of the doctors in town, that vampire bats from South America or Mexico have flown all the way to Europe, where they're predominantly insect-eating bats. Someone got bit, namely Herman, and he's somehow taken on the characteristics of a vampire bat. And they couldn't be more wrong. Unfortunately, things get exacerbated when he tries to talk to this hypochondriac lady who crops up here and there in the film. And when she finds out who he is, she faints, and when she comes to, all she sees is this dog who had chased Herman away, and thinks Herman turned into a dog. So, when this one doctor's own housekeeper gets killed mere minutes away from having been seen alive. Herman's the prime suspect. He gets chased out to the hills, gets stuck in a cave, and jumps to his death to avoid the insanity of the crowd. Poor guy. He was just a simpleton who was fascinated with bats. Completely innocent. Meanwhile, this doctor's female assistant overhears something she shouldn't have. It turns out this doctor, who's been featured prominently throughout the flick, is the one responsible for the deaths. He hypnotized his other assistant, a guy named Emil, to capture people and bring them to the guy's house in order to drain their blood and use it in an experiment to generate life. Some sort of cloning, I think. He's got what looks to be a heart beating in a tank. That looks like a rotten potato, but it's twitching, so it's got to be some kind of heart. And when it's revealed, the assistant is sent to collect the boyfriend of the female assistant because she needs to be apparently punished for her wandering ear. But it's a bait and switch. Turns out the boyfriend was able to outsmart the assistant and pulled the gun. And the doc's lack of concentration allows the assistant to snap out of it, take the gun, and tell the boyfriend and the female assistant to get out. Which saves the day, because then the doctor and he wrestle and both are killed. The Mad Doctor and his monstrous creation are completely destroyed. And the day is saved. But the weird thing is, the movie ends on a joke. The hypochondriac lady who cropped up earlier, she complains that this chemical that the doctor prescribed her is affecting her in a weird way. She runs off to the bathroom, and the female assistant and her boyfriend realize that the prescription was for a laxative. But weird way to end the movie. Next is the story of the ape. Boris Karloff plays a doctor who's been kicked out of the medical community because of his work with spinal fluid. And he's moved to a small town where that work that he's continuing in secret to help a paralyzed woman walk again has earned him some ridicule among the local bumpkins. Kids throw rocks at his house, and people look over their shoulder to see if he's there. Anyway, things turn a bit wild when the paralyzed girl and her boyfriend go to the circus. And they have a good time, but after the show, and everyone leaves, tragedy strikes. An ape who is part of the sideshow is abused by one of the handlers because the ape killed the handler's dad. Only the handler was just as abusive. So the ape was fully justified. You don't poke a creature for years and expect it not to attack you at the first chance it gets. I mean, that's just common sense. That's what happened with several elephant attacks over the past few decades. Anyway, the gorilla gets the upper hand on the guy and injures him severely. And in the process, a candle is knocked over. Well, no, a cigarette is knocked into some hay and starts a fire. Thankfully, no animals or other people were hurt, but the gorilla escapes, and the circus itself needs to be completely rebuilt. Eventually, the gorilla finds its way into the professor's house, and he manages to subdue the beast with a combination of chemicals to the face and judicious application of a knife. But he tells his maid to keep it a secret that the ape is there. Oh, by the way, the ape, very realistic looking. I mean, you could tell it's a costume, but there are scenes where the ape sort of emotes and moves in a realistic way. So kudos to the effects team and the costumer for making a very realistic gorilla. Not 100%, but close. Anyway, as time passes, people start turning up dead, and the ape is the prime suspect. And we see the ape leaving the professor's house at various times, walking inexplicably more upright than it used to. And the sheriff and his posse are hard-pressed to try and find the beast, but their dogs keep leading them back to the professor's house, which arises suspicions. Now, eventually, after some kids take a shot at it with a .22, the ape tries to get back to the doctor's house, only it's shot down on the doorstep. And it's revealed that the ape is actually the doctor in disguise. He had, I guess, taxidermied the ape's hide and face to make a costume so he can collect spinal fluid from various unscrupulous characters. The first one being the injured but alive handler who started this whole mess. And he used that to create a serum which started giving the paralyzed woman feeling in her legs. And just before he dies, he gets to see her step out of her chair and walk. So he dies happily, and the film ends with the woman now on her 2 feet, having burned her wheelchair and vowed never to be in one again, and her boyfriend embracing. So, bittersweet ending for all. And finally, our last flick is The Monster Maker. We meet a piano player who delights in tickling the ivories for an audience, which includes his daughter and the daughter's boyfriend. Unfortunately, also in the audience is this doctor who realizes that the daughter is a spitting image of his late wife, much to the chagrin of the doc's female assistant, who sort of has designs on him too, only he doesn't see her that way. So, the doctor tries to make romantic gestures to the daughter, but she's like, "No, sir, swipe left." At least I think that's swipe left. That's a That's a Tinder reference. I don't even know if I'm doing it right. Anyway, she's like, no thank you. And the doc's like, you don't have a choice. And it's revealed that he's not actually a doctor. He killed and stole the identity of the real doctor after he figured out how to give people a rapidly progressive version of this disease that I think affected the Elephant Man. So I'm just going to call it Elephant Man syndrome. Of course, I'm not entirely sure. But it's the same effect. Agromantially, I think it's called. Anyway, the real doc had designs on the fake doc's wife, and the wife was okay with it. So, he infected her with the Elephant Man syndrome to try and dissuade the real doctor, with the plan being to reverse the condition later. Unfortunately, she offed herself before the false doc had a chance, so he just continued his work. He figured out how to halt the disorder, but not cure it. So, after one last attempt to get the daughter's hand in marriage, he then uses his muscle man assistant, played by Glenn Strange again. Way to go, Glenn. To keep the dad, the piano player, at the doc's place, so he can infect him with the Elephant Man syndrome. And at first, it's not apparent, other than the guy's got too much energy and his fingers feel a little swollen. But eventually he goes full Elephant Man, and this causes his daughter to faint, forcing the boyfriend to gaslight her into thinking she hallucinated. Meanwhile, the piano player goes to the false doc's place and orders him to cure him. And the doc's like, sure, I'll cure you if you order your daughter to marry me. And this causes a fight, which causes the piano player to be restrained. And this pushes the female assistant to her limits, because she sacrificed everything because she wants the doc, and he's like, no thank you. And so she wallows in her pity, and sometimes gets hypnotized by the doc to force her to do as he says. And at one point, it's revealed that he wants to get rid of her because she's become a liability, and almost manages to sick his gorilla on her. Yeah, they reused the gorilla costume from the previous film. But thankfully, she's got a pet dog, and that dog is very aggressive toward the gorilla and saves her. Meanwhile, the daughter, who's been tricked into coming over to the false doctor's house, gets to see her dad, and the doc's persona slips. He goes full-on mad scientist and insists she marries him, tries to restrain her. Luckily, her dad breaks free of his bonds and tries to fight the doc, only he's got a gun. And so a fight breaks out ultimately resulting in the doc getting killed. Meanwhile, the female assistant gets restrained by the male assistant because she's having none of this. Luckily, the boyfriend shows up, knocks out the male assistant, and the female assistant reassures the two of them that the piano player will get his health back because she's been working with the doc to perfect the cure for the Elephant Man syndrome. And the film ends with the three of them watching the girl's father play the piano once again. And they lived happily ever after, and Glenn Strange's character, for all we know, is still knocked out on the floor of the false doc's house. And that's it for this block of horror classics. Coming up next, Killer Shrews, Immortal Brains, more zombies, and the classic tale of a man becoming a monster. Stay tuned.